Here we are. Fantastic. Okay. So again, welcome everyone. So what we really intend to focus on today with our training is looking at the Stop Campus Hazing Act as it relates to how our institutions are going to be working to implement the different aspects of this law. And there's some main aspects of it. One main aspect has to do with reporting for our annual security report and our new campus hazing transparency report. Another aspect has to do with our educational programs that we're going to use and the policies associated with our hazing prevention efforts on our campuses. And so we're going to be looking at a lot of those things. We're also going to be looking at the new legal requirements for institutions and providing some clarity around those things. With all the conversations that we have, we know that there are different nuances and dynamics with every campus. So providing, to the best of our ability, clarity around those legal requirements and developing strategies to enhance your campus policies and education on hazing. So that's really what our goals are, and what we're aimed at is fostering safer and more informed campus environments to combat hazing um, in all of its forms. And while I want to just provide a quick introduction of myself as we kind of get into this and who we have on this call that has just such a wealth of knowledge outside of myself. Out of everybody on this call, I'm probably the one that has so much to learn from the other two individuals that are joining us today. But my name is Chris Woods. I'm a partner with Plaid. If you're not familiar with Plaid, we're an organizational training and development firm that focuses on building educational programs, both in person and online. And we assist campuses with building their hazing prevention education efforts. We support national organizations like fraternities and sororities as well in their educational programs and provide guidance to those institutions and organizations on how they can create a holistic approach to hazing prevention education. And I'm going to turn it over to my two colleagues that are here as allow them to introduce themselves. So, Kim, we'd love to hear
Hi,
all about you.
greetings from Memphis, Tennessee. I'm excited to be here today. It's interesting to dig back into the clarity reporting process. Chris and Rashid, we've had some great preliminary dialogues. I have had the uh, professional pleasure of serving as the compliance officer alongside the chief of police at two major universities in my career, and was fortunate enough to be asked to give thoughts on the legislation, particularly the definition of hazing and then the timeline expectations and the framework for that. This has been a long time coming, so I'm excited to be here talking with you from my office at the Pi Kappa Alpha International Fraternity headquarters, coming off of the heels of Jazz Fest 25. So I'm in a good spot right now. So, Rashid,
Yes, Kimberly and Chris, thank you so much. Hello to everyone that is joining us today. My name is Rashid Ali Cromwell. I wish I could tell you I was coming off something as exciting as Jazz Fest or Derby Week, New Orleans and Louisville, but I have neither. So I'm looking forward to vacation this summer, but I'm excited to be here with you. And some of my experiences professionally are twofold, both in the education side as a content developer, consultant, speaker, and trainer, working with a number of colleges and universities across the country, as well as national fraternal organizations and all different councils, but also from a legal perspective, which is interesting, and has a very unique cross section as it relates to my work in fraternal law, from everything from working through hazing investigations with different organizations, as well as implementation and consulting with general counsel and attorneys on campuses as well. And so we're just excited that you all have joined us. Speaking of legalities, Chris, let's go ahead and talk about this disclaimer very quickly. We have to say this before we jump into our first icebreaker. While I am a practicing attorney, this does not constitute specific legal professional advice while we would love to have you all as clients, this webinar does not qualify you as one. Hence, this is not legal advice, for informational purposes only. And we hope that each and every one of your situations, there's something that you could take from this, whether you're at an organization, trade association, or campus. But we did want to mention that brief disclaimer before jumping into our first chat icebreaker. So I will turn it back over to Chris. Again, we're excited. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to working with you today. Chris?
Perfect. Thank you, Rashid. All right. So we want to get to know you a little bit. We want to understand kind of who we've got with us on the training today. And so our first icebreaker is just to introduce yourself. We would love to know your name and your role. And if you would like to share your institution or organization that you're part of as well, feel free to put that in the chat. We'd love to see who we've got with us today and share. If you know any of us, Kim, Rashid, and myself, we love conversation. We love discussion. That is where we find really positive and collaborative efforts that are going to make an impact. So feel free to put your information into the chat, your name and role if you would like. And as you do that, okay, love it. Thank you I see those coming in. That's wonderful. You can hold off just on the question about discussing your role of compliance. We're just kind of getting an idea of what your role is right now. And as you were putting those in, we like interaction as well, but we understand sometimes that questions that we pose would be better suited in an anonymous format. And so we've got a few different questions that we'll be asking throughout the webinar as a way to get your feedback, to kind of understand more about where you're coming from, where you're at, and how you are accomplishing your efforts for implementation of the Stop Campus Hazing Act. And to do so, we use this really great tool called ClassPoint. You may have used this in the past with other programs or webinars, but if you would like to join us in that discussion, you can see the information on the screen. Go to classpoint.app, and when you get there, you'll be asked to put in a code, and that code is 11382. So I'll give everybody a moment, take a sec to go to classpoint.app. You can do that on your browser. I like to do it on my phone. It provides me the ability to kind of engage with the questions on my phone without having to clutter up my screen so much. And so take a moment, join us on classpoint.app and use that code. Again, it'll ask for your name, but all the questions that we ask will be anonymous. And so no worries about anything being tied to you necessarily. We just, again, for the benefit of the group, understand where you all are coming from. Okay, so I love seeing everybody introducing themselves. Again, thank you all for being here. So we're going to jump in as you all are kind of getting added to ClassPoint. We've got our first question for you all, and don't worry, this is going to stay up on there. But the question that we have for everybody who's kind of getting logged into ClassPoint is, what is your responsibility in the Stop Campus Hazing Act compliance? And so whether you're in an organization or you're on a campus, what is your responsibility? And so take a moment and type that into your ClassPoint platform that you're using, whether on your computer or phone, and your responses are going to pop up and we're going to kind of get a better idea. Okay, perfect. So somebody not really responsible for compliance on a campus, in charge of clery compliance. Love that. Thank you. Very good. Let's see if we have anybody else. Oh, part of the university committee that is doing this work. We're seeing that as a very popular aspect of campus compliance, is pulling all the different stakeholders together as a way of evaluating how this law is going to impact all of the different areas of campus. Okay, I love that. Communicating about the requirements of the law to the powers that be. I know many of us are the messenger of what we need to do, bring back information to our different working groups and staff committees that we might have. Okay, I love that. Thank you so much. Love that. Indirect responsibilities to supervise and provide data for reporting areas. That's a big aspect of this law. And being a part of the reporting aspects of the annual security report. Programming pieces, very good. Love it. Co-chair of Hazing Education Working Group. Love that. Part of the team that's going to work to report to the dashboard for the clear requirements. Okay, thank you so much. That was really great. All right, we're going to go on to our next poll that we have here, just as again to dive a little bit deeper about where you're currently at. I'll close this one, go to our next one. So our next one is a temperature check. We really wanted to kind of see, okay, well, where are our participants at? Because as Kim, Rashid, and myself work with different campuses, everybody's kind of all over the board a little bit in where they are at in meeting, coming up with their plan for their campus to meet the Stop Campus Hazing Act. And again, if you're a national organization or a trade association, you don't have to answer this one if you don't want to, but maybe you do have some role in supporting campus professionals that are doing that. So this is a multiple choice question, A, B, C, or D. Do you have a full plan in place already? Are you just having meetings so far? You have no idea what you're doing? Or are you just now learning about the Stop Campus Hazing Act? Because there are still plenty of campuses that are just now coming to the table, realizing that this is a part of what they need to do. So give you a moment, answer those questions. Okay, fantastic. Some of us have a full plan already. Many of us are just meeting. Great. Some of us have no idea. That's good. Okay. Well, it seems like most of us have at least some aspect. Again, if you're on this webinar, hopefully you have at least a little bit of a concept of what's going on with the Stop Campus Hazing Act, but totally fine if you don't. We're here to support you in that regard. So thanks for answering that question. So again, most people, it sounds like they're still in meetings, they're still in the collaboration and brainstorming mode or information gathering to bring it back to their meetings. All right. And a big part of the reason now that we have a better idea of where you're at is, and ultimately why we decided to have this webinar was to focus on a lot of the challenges that we're seeing on campuses related to the act. The challenges associated with hazing reporting on campuses can vary widely. And so we want to discuss how hazing incidents are identified, the confusion that may arise regarding who is responsible for reporting, and the importance of clear policies and procedures to ensure effective reporting and response. And so those are some of the main things that we wanted to focus on with you all today. Now that we have a better idea of where you're coming from, it helps us tailor the conversation based on these challenges. Now, the last question we have for you all is going to be focused on kind of your role and the importance of your role and anyone's role with the Stop Campus Hazing Act is first, what could happen if we are not compliant with this law? As we know, fines can reach up to almost $70,000 per violation. So that's a major financial impact that could happen by not being compliant with this law. And so that's why it's so important that we understand the financial obligations for our institutions to ensure compliance and avoid costly penalties. And again, we say this because that's the last thing we want are our institutions to be fined for not being compliant with this law. But as we are inching closer and closer to different milestone deadlines for implementing this law, it's becoming more and more of a possibility that these fines could become a reality and these violations could become a reality. And so our last question that we have for everybody is your involvement. Are you involved in your annual security report for compliance? And so if the answer is yes, again, if you are on a campus, and I see the correction, Kim, effective of January 21st. Guess what? The fine has gone up. So thanks for clarifying that. So it's even more important that we ensure that we're meeting compliance because the fine keeps going up. No surprise. But what is your role when it comes to the annual security report? Are you somebody that's actually having to fill out the report? Are you just providing information? Are you somebody that's a mandatory reporter? So go ahead, and we're going to make this one open for everybody as well. This is our last question that we have as part of our poll, just to get a baseline on where you're at. What is your role in your annual security report for compliance? There we go. Mandatory reporter. Great. There we go. Compile and publish the annual security report. So this is really important for your role. Love that. Confirm what fraternity and sorority houses are. Absolutely.
You know, Chris, one of the things I think will pop up as folks are answering is the whole debate of who you could make a mandatory reporter. I think that may resurge, particularly when we think about the behavior of hazing and how far too often it's been siloed into a fraternity and sorority life problem. And that debate with the Clery reporting and mandating that chapter advisors become mandatory reporters has been a back and forth discussion that pops every so often, usually when there's a new crime. And I think it's been pretty solidly answered that a chapter advisor who works for an institution may be in a role at the institution that would be considered a campus security authority, so therefore a reporter. But volunteers that volunteer for an international or national organization are not in that capacity employees of the institution. So that dance around, does a college have a right to say they're a mandatory reporter? I don't know, Rashid, if there's anything on that. Last resolution I recall from the Department of Ed, Department of Justice, and a whole lot of people was no, you can't mandate that non-employees are campus security authorities. So I think that may pop up again. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Thanks for mentioning that, Kim. Okay, so really great responses. Thanks you to everyone who kind of shared what their role is in the annual security report. And now we're going to kind of turn it over and get into an aspect of the annual security report that is not necessarily highlighted in the Stop Campus Hazing Act, but we believe is an important aspect to be aware of. And so when we think about this, Kim, when we think about understanding timely warnings, can you kind of give us more insight into how this might impact for the Stop Campus Hazing Act or hazing incidents on campus?
Sure. I think, and again, going back to our purpose for this conversation today is just to think a little more broadly than just the checkbox of compliance numbers. Is that something that will happen now because it's a clearly reportable crime? Is hazing incidents will be subject to the timely warning review. And so there's guidance, which awesome guidance. And I want to really quick here and then again give attribution to the Clery Center for all the great work that they've done in putting together very simple guides and resources. Just if you're just kind of getting into it or you want to check your work, I would hit the Clery Center website. Kind of like using the CDC during COVID. Let's like follow the framework from the experts. And while it's not tasked out as one of the steps, it's mentioned in a side column about the fact that make sure that your timely warning protocols have been updated to include hazing. And then the question will become, who issues timely warnings? In my experience, it's pretty consistently been the chief of police or a designee of the chief of police. And it's interesting because what necessitates a timely warning? And that we've bantered about this, and it's an immediate threat or a threat to the community. And when we think about an incident of hazing, it would be a pretty unique fact pattern, I think, to identify that an individual team, club, chapter, group, and a report of hazing would have necessitate a timely warning for an entire campus community because the potential for who could be victimized by the behavior is limited to the members of the group. And so I think it'll be an interesting dance for colleges and universities. And where I see our those of us at international organizations coming into this is, what if a timely warning is issued? A timely warning doesn't say an incident has been found to have occurred. It says we've received information. And so then, and I've been through this with supporting groups and also in my professional roles, trying to get a timely warning redacted or pulled back because I had a situation where the timely warning named the wrong fraternity and the wrong address, and it wasn't actually the Pike House. It was another Pike fraternity, which there are many of them, and had to work really, really hard with the campus police to get that pulled back. because they were like, oh, it's out there now, we'll just correct it, not understanding the implications of reputation and blowback from it. So I think we do get involved in timely warnings periodically from an organizational perspective, but how have you discussed and what work has been done to determine, one, we have to add hazing to the timely warning list of behaviors crimes using the federal definition, using the campus definition, because the annual security report requires the federal definition, but does the timely warning require that? Or would it be based on something within the community? Rashid, from your, I know you kind of dug into this a little more legally. I just throw the, I wonder how this will play out. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, Kim, I appreciate you sharing that. When I started looking into this, as an attorney, when you're looking at prior case law, it's a concept called stare decisis, right? And so you want to look at what the laws say before this came out. And so while, SCHA is new, it's grounded in clarity, right? And so we started kind of digging through some of the previous PRRs. PRRs are program review reports. So this is what the federal government, Department of Education, will send a school. For example, Liberty University, which caught a lot of people's attention just last year because they had about $14 million worth of fines. And one of the things that they were talking about with timely warnings, because when we were talking about this as a team, it was like, you think of a timely warning, you think of it in a concept like Kim was talking about. For example, a couple of weeks ago, active shooter in Tallahassee at Florida State, right? We got to send something across the campus to increase the awareness, the safety of our community. But it really doesn't like fit when you think about hazing per se. And so when I started looking at some of the case law, one of the takeaways that I'd encourage some of the participants here to think about too is, in addition to timely warnings, under clarity is also something called emergency notifications. And one of the things the Department of Ed was very clear on in some of the violations in Liberty was that, hey, they had an instance of a football player who had allegedly been sexually assaulting one of the other students. And it was just one student. And they said, listen, you can't subsection a timely warning. In other words, in Kim's scenario, you can't say, oh, it's just this specific group or fraternity that we need to send a timely warning to. But they did say you can send an emergency notification, which is another form of a timely warning to a particular subset or subcommunity to be able to meet that threshold of being able to communicate that. And I thought that was very interesting for two reasons. One is because we hear a lot about timely warnings and we don't hear a lot about emergency notifications. But two, it was only one individual. And they said, even though it was only one individual, that one individual should have been sent an emergency notification. And so that's something to think about when we're talking about specifically hazing. If it's one person joining an organization, a fraternity or sorority, right? I might not send a timely warning to the campus, but I might send an emergency notification to everybody I know that's going through a pledge class, that's going through recruitment, that's going through intake in that particular organization, to put them on notice, to let them know, hey, this is a potential issue or potential problem. So I think as this unfolds, it'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. But that's one thing we definitely wanted to share, and a nuance as it relates to that area that Kim is talking about with timely warnings.
Well, and I think it's important. I dropped a little link in the chat. It's a really simple explanation of timely warning emergency notification. And I'm concerned that because it's not listed on the checklist of steps to take, that it will get overlooked. And I think some of the things that we need to be cognizant of, as we are with all timely warnings, is not to err on the side of transparency, but then create panic in a communication where something could be extrapolated out of the communication that causes more angst. This shows up in a lot of the conversation about timely warnings and emergency notifications with protests or conflicts between groups on campus. Like, be cautious. turn it into something in the spirit of transparent communication. Because even if it's like we want to show that we're being open about every allegation of hazing, you could err on the side of not being in alignment with the best practice and the guidance. And that could result in conflict between the individuals or organization that's being identified in the timely warning and the reality of the situation. I think it's also really important that the individuals who are making those decisions, let's not assume that they understand hazing and hazing as a behavior, because that's been one of the challenges, right? We didn't have a uniform definition. It's not criminal in every state. We're still struggling to get prosecutors to prosecute in states where it's criminal. So let's not assume that if at a prosecutorial level, there's still a lot of confusion around the behavior of hazing. Let's keep that in mind when we think about, and not, Chris, I don't think just with timely warnings, I think across the board, and Rashid, where we are thinking about this is a whole new behavior that we're adding to a bucket. And just because there's a federal definition, let's have a conversation so we don't end up with I'm going to say it. Are you ready? I'm going to say it. Boys will be boys. Like we're not going to count this as hazing because this is just horseplay, or boys will be boys, or coercive behavior, or like let's have a uniform understanding. And then making sure that part of the education that you do in general, not just about the hazing legislation, but maybe this is a really good time to be thinking about, let's tell our students and parents and faculty and staff about the Clary report and what it is and why we do it and what the data really is talking about, and um, help communities to understand the purpose of, the relevance of, and the when it should be happening in information on timely warnings. Chris, we
Yeah.
have a hand up. Um, somebody has it. Oh, it's me. Why is my hand? I don't know.
Well,
I don't
Kim,
have a question. But
well,
anyways, and I know we don't want to like stay on this too long, but I just think those are important things to think about when we think about the impact of building out our response to this legislation.
yeah. One quick thing, Chris, I want to add to that, no more than 30 seconds, is when Kim was talking about overreacting, one of the best practices that was suggested through the PRR by the Department of Ed that if you're on a campus to consider is because I saw a lot of mandatory reporters, listed earlier, that, while the chief of police is the person that's issuing this, consider a team, so that it's institutionalized across the board where you have, law enforcement and leadership. Because what was happening in the Liberty case is they had people on campus reporting. The chief of police wanted to make a timely warning, and then somebody in leadership came over and said, no, we're not releasing that to the public. And so they really got kind of scraped across the coals because they had the internal procedures, but there was somebody in leadership, I think it was like a VP or AVP, that came across and said, no, we're not releasing this stuff. And so they were saying, in order to operationalize that, like break that down, to Kim's point, you're in crisis management. What should I do? What should I report? What should I say? Not only going to more of a team model in that timely warning reporting, but also considering a matrix, which is very helpful as it relates to consideration. So
Mhm.
more objective and less subjective in instances that is happening.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for mentioning that, because as you were kind of talking about, as you bring up the idea of like a matrix of all these potential incidents potentially coming in to the police department, the daily crime log now has to be it now has to be vetted for instances of hazing. I know, Kim, you've got experience related to a daily crime log, and can you kind of share a little bit more insight on that aspect of it?
Yeah, it's just another piece that's relevant to the Clary report, and what the Stop Campus Hazing Act has done is put hazing in the Clary report. So I want to, as we build it out, we don't want to be so narrowly focused on the act that we forget it's part of a bigger picture. And so there's the expectation of maintaining um, a relatively easily understood daily crime log through public safety. And that's only if your campus has a public safety or police department. Again, I recognize we have colleagues from national, international organizations with us. This will become relevant when because hazing is now a crime. You know, that's the big question. I threw that out to some folks in Cleary, and I know Meredith is here from Stop Hazing. I had a little side debate with somebody about, well, but if it's not a crime in your state, it's only a civil liability, then do you have to report it? The federal legislation made it a crime. And because we didn't have consistency with the definition, just like we do with other crimes that are reported, they defined it for us. And so this is not a finding of responsibility. This is not a criminal charge report. This is a pretty simple. And it just is, the day the crime was reported, hazing would now be considered a crime. The nature of it, that'll be interesting to determine how much detail is or isn't released, where it happened or where it's potentially could have occurred. And then what can be interesting is that if a behavior of hazing has become so integrated into a club's culture that there are multiple incidents across a period of time, then there can be multiple daily crime log reports. Just like we're going to talk about, there can be multiple annual security data points. So I think that's important because, again, it's not one of the things that is on the checklist. So as we're building out our initiatives, are we thinking about how are we integrating hazing as a crime into our daily crime log? And think about it. You probably all have great stories about student journalists there's that student journalist that's assigned to the police beat and they check the daily crime log every morning to see what's come in. And that's how oftentimes little stories will break about situations early or too early or a little late in the game. So hazing will now fall into that spot. And so an allegation can be made, communicated to the right people. A daily crime log can be up before we even at an organizational level know there's been an allegation. And so I think being conscious of the fact that we need to talk about our communication strategies. How are we going to make sure that our colleagues know and aren't caught off guard if we can to all capacity? Let's talk about the daily crime log and what constitutes a crime and how it ends up there with our students. I worked with a group of students and their alumni who were pretty fired up about a daily crime log report about an incident of underage consumption that resulted in public intoxication, that resulted in a citation. Nobody went to the hospital and they just wanted it taken down off the daily crime log. Well, it was a criminal situation that a police officer engaged with. They weren't going to take it down because it was a reported crime, underage drinking, public intoxication. And it was connected to the chapter's party. So they were upset, but let's make sure students know and our faculty and staff and people know that hazing will now be part of our daily crime log. It's important that daily crime logs get updated with pertinent information. And again, the whole purpose of the daily crime log is really to advance the transparency that we're not hiding anything. So and again, police officials, campus safety, security authorities, that's who we work with. But I agree with Rashid that they are always appreciative of having a team of individuals that help institutionalize decisions and weigh in on compliance and implementation. Yeah. So questions, concerns, drop them in the chats so that we can answer real time. Rashid, you were going to talk a little bit about the critical considerations.
Yeah, for sure. Really quickly, with the educational component that is required for implementing on campuses, we just wanted to share, a couple of considerations when implementing it. And, I like to call it the 3 C's: context, right, content, and capacity. Shout out to stophazing.org. I see Megan here. Meredith talks about this all the time, Dr. Allen. they're doing great work, right? I need to consider the demographic of my institution. Is this a PWI? I'm at the University of Delaware, or is this a HBCU? I'm at Delaware State, right? Both are in the same vicinity area, but the way I'm approaching that education is going to be different. Is this faculty, staff, or students? It's required. It's the education is for all of those demographics, right? And so considering those things at a base level, private, public, all those things. But I think really the context and the capacity is where we encourage a lot of the participants to look. Yes, we want it to be evidence-based, but just because it's evidence-based doesn't mean the participants understand what you're saying, right? What is the attention span of the demographic that I'm talking to? If it's Generation Z and it's Alpha generation, I need to consider that they're thinking about the what, why is this important before I even get into the content. So we just encourage you to think about all of those different strategies when implementing this, not just making sure it's evidence-based, not just getting something off the shelf, but really customizing it for your community and even understanding the nuances within groups of your community. Yes, it may be athletics, but the women's lacrosse team is different than the men's football team. And what does that mean and how does that show up? Next slide. Chris?
Chris, before we jump to the requirements for that, I want to really quickly, Rashid, you prompted something for me. Training. This is like webinars with Kim are like being in my brain. Training, who's receiving training? That's a whole nother component that in the Clery Act, one of the things we provide is in your annual report is how we're training our campus security authorities and how we're providing, what training are they receiving? What's the education look like? And so I think you have to think about that in the context, not just of this, of the primary prevention education that's research informed and data driven. And then with all the kind of factual content that Chris, I think you're going to talk about here in just a second.
Mhm.
It's how are we preparing our campus security authorities and the individuals making decisions and um, the community on. It's been fascinating to hear some of the rumors from undergrads of what they think the Stop Campus Hazing Act federal law says. And like all the way to that now you will be federally prosecuted if you haze. Like just trying to help them to understand. So what does that include? And how are you thinking about that within the context of who you're working with? That's culture and competency informed as much as the prevention education you're doing around the behavior of hazing. So I think going back and reviewing how we're doing our training for Clery compliance, now it's an opportunity to put fresh eyes on it. But I just really think, especially because such a difficult behavior to get agreement on, there needs to be extensive training of these professionals so that they're all on the same page. Yeah. So,
And
Chris, I think it's you. Is it you?
it is, and of course, anytime we do I feel like we're sitting around the couch talking about this issue sometimes as well, because there's so many aspects of how you can look at this law. And I think a big aspect of the education piece is not just providing hazing prevention education that would go to faculty, staffs, and students, but it's also educating them on all of the policies that are associated with this new law. The hazing policies that have to be created now as a part of this law and as a part of the annual security report, well, they have to include a statement of policy regarding the prevention and awareness programs that are implemented on campus that relate to hazing, which would include a description of research-informed campus-wide prevention programs, and how they're designed to reach all those different audiences that you talked about. Again, the difference between the lacrosse team and the student body council versus the faculty members in the business school, right? How do we customize and provide that education to them to meet their learning styles and where they're at? But it also needs to include information, and the education that we provide needs to include that information on the hazing policies themselves. And so this is an area where in conversations that I've had, I've seen kind of a gap in realizing that, okay, well, not only do we have to provide hazing prevention education, but it's also on all of our policies that we have as well. And that's a custom piece for every single campus. That's not a program that you can purchase on hazing prevention. You've got to create a custom education program and resources on your unique aspects of your campus. And so what your policies are, how that relates to your state and local laws, and resources that you have available. So different things have to go into that as well. Now, the law actually states that primary prevention strategies intend to stop hazing before hazing occurs, which may include skill building for bystander intervention, information about ethical leadership, and the promotion of strategies for building group cohesion without hazing. And so, in addition to that, each institution's website that they have has to also include a statement notifying the public of their annual availability for their hazing statistics that they have. And so this has to include a link to their annual security report, information about the institution's policies, both at a local, state, and tribal laws on hazing, and information required by the campus hazing transparency report. And so there's a lot that can go into this, to your point, Kim, of how we tackle this, tackle the education aspect of it. There's lots of different strategies that I know you and Rashid have kind of implemented with different campuses. And so, as you think about the communication, what have you seen to work really well, or what should folks consider when they think about the communication of hazing processes within their campus community?
One thing, Chris, that I've seen, which is very successful, is integrating it during new student orientation. And so this whole notion of we're going to wait till somebody joins a org or join a team. No, we're going to prioritize this as a collegiate journey and frame that whole issue with that. And so the introduction, looking at even the science saying that hazing prevention should start in K through 12, the earlier you can start it, the better. But I think one of the things that we have seen that helps is integrating it so that it's campus wide. One thing that everyone has to do as a new student, whatever institution they go through, is this onboarding process. And so we're going to infuse that into whether it's freshman orientation classes, whether it's through, the welcome week, wherever we're integrating this into the entire institutional fabric. That, Chris, by default, helps encourage collaboration between new student orientation, between student activities, between athletics, because it's reaching everyone and it's sending a message. That's one thing that definitely helps.
Well, and I think too, it's undergraduate education is a big component, but faculty, staff, community member education is, so when we talk about communicating, we're not talking about the process of hazing people. We're talking about reporting and responding and all the things, like to openly communicate that to a community. And then the strategies for campus buy-in, when I take it out of the student bucket and I put it in the staff faculty bucket, I think about working with the amazing staff that oversee and oversaw in my experience, but continue today when helping colleges and universities, that are the people that are overlooked. Like they're the people that are making sure the building's clean and the electricity's working and the sign has been replaced that got damaged. Those folks that are out and about, that may be observers of incidents, that can be of critical importance. Like really thinking about how are we not just focused on the expectation of primary prevention education for our undergraduates, but across the campus, and why it should be important for faculty members to understand that even though for 10 semesters in a row in the fall, 10 fall semesters, you've seen this behavior in your freshman 101 class where these individuals tend to show up one or two, sometimes more, dressed weirdly, are non-communicative in class, even though they historically had been. And there are things that we see that could be indicators of potential hazing, but they become so nuanced or they happen so frequently. Sometimes folks say, oh, I didn't notice. And so maybe that is everybody's an upstander in our community. And we're going to use the campus crime report as an example of all the different areas where you can be an upstander. And let's focus on hazing because it's the newest crime. So I think that that's an important strategy, is to think about, and then to meet people where they're at, because we certainly don't need to over educate if we've already done a major campaign and our community is very invested in the dialogues around hazing and the prevention of hazing. I think about the IFC at the University of Georgia, who's been personally, as a council, invested in this for 6 years now. I would have a very different conversation with the group of leaders from that community, from that particular subsection of the community, than I would have with some of the other students in the Greek life community who maybe haven't had as much exposure to conversation about hazing. So I think all of that, all of our skills have to come into play, and we can't limit ourselves to, oh, we have to educate the student.
Yeah. I love that, Kim. So, in your experience, and I'd love to hear from both of you all as it relates to like the consequences of poor education, because you all have been doing this for a long time. What are some of the real consequences of poor education that you've seen or potentially could see?
Well, I think, one is we're seeing it real time. With the Caleb Wilson case, the young man that passed away at Southern University, it's an active, ongoing investigation case. So I'm not going to comment on that specifically, but to your question about consequences and that second bullet point, media and reputational harm, this was televised on ABC Worldwide News twice, at least twice, with David Muir. But then at a very grassroots level, when Omega Psi Phi fraternity had their district meeting in New Orleans, the family took out billboards throughout New Orleans during the meeting to raise awareness of what happened to their son. And this is less than 6 weeks after. And I was talking to a lot of our team about this, and just in general, it was something about this incident that just seemed different. And part of it is social media, the way it just kind of accelerated in a way that just social media does. TikTok, YouTube, every day was something different. But, the billboards were just, it was an interesting kind of thing. And you talk about reputational harm. I'm not even sure, Kim, how you quantify that as it
Mhm.
relates, and what that does. And so, considering what these collateral things can happen real time, and the at the speed that they happen, it's hard to really kind of
Mhm.
consider. But this is some of the things that we're dealing with as it relates, not just the legal and the risk of lawsuits, but you're talking about how people are reacting. And this isn't, this is the family that's doing that. And so I
Mhm.
think that's something to really think about with watchdog groups, families, all of these things, how that's going to impact the
Mhm.
overall institutional
Well,
reputation.
and I think in general, we need to be conscious of the fact that a lot of people put a lot of love, blood, sweat, and tears into getting this legislation passed. Many of those individuals that were the real champions did that on the back of their own grief at the loss of a child, or a brother, or a sister, or a friend. And they're paying close attention. I don't know if folks have seen the reports that are coming up about concerns of non-compliance with state laws. But there's looking to say, hey, like, this number of campuses are not in compliance with the state law. I think that's going to continue with this legislation because folks are so invested, as we should be, that we're not going to just let each other off the hook, that there's going to be importance. And this is a new industry standard around the behavior of hazing for plaintiffs' attorneys to have access to. And so if we don't provide all the components of the prevention education that are pretty simply outlined in the legislation, then we may get checked on. You're not really doing anything preventive. People know where to report it. They know what the policy is. They know what the law is. Is that enough? Or if we undersaturate and we don't recognize this is a campus wide initiative, an acknowledgement of what we learned in 2009 from Elizabeth and Mary when they did the first big study. And we learned that it cuts across types of student groups. So if you're not providing education in performance organizations and an incident occurs and someone's injured, they're going to ask, what was the prevention education you gave these? Well, we never had an incident of hazing in the a cappella group, so we didn't. So sorry that your child has been injured in a way that will impact their lifetime. So I think we need to be conscious of doing the right thing because it's a new industry standard, not an attorney, just a person whose brain thinks that way sometimes. And I think for the sake of time, Chris, do we want to,
Yeah, I
we're going
think
to skip ahead?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of, the everything that you said as it relates to the campus hazing transparency report is another big aspect of
Yeah,
where we need to be compliant.
yeah.
And the law is very clear on what we now need to provide, and we're already seeing lots of examples of institutions across the country who are actively, whether that be a state law that they are being compliant with, or they're already taking steps to meet this new federal legislation when it comes to the campus hazing transparency
Right.
report.
Yeah.
When we think about the risks of misreporting and things like that, what we're always mindful of, or what are plaintiff attorneys looking for, like you said, Kim, and Rashid, this is your area when it comes to what potentially a plaintiff's attorney is going to look for. But I think, in your perspective, in your legal perspective, what are the things that, a campus could maybe be caught off guard with?
Well, I think Kim mentioned it, right? Recognizing the magnitude of the hazing issue and then making sure that preventive and educative measures are matching that, right? And so if I say, hey, I know this has been an issue and this is what this is, but I'm not providing the resources, the access, that, I'm going to look exactly at that and say, why not? Right? You knew, you should have known, you've been put on notice. And so I'm going to start searching for those things to see what you've done, what has been done, and also look to what you say that your compliance is, right? What are the things that you already have in place? And are you doing those? And so I think, that's a huge thing, right? Being cognizant of what those policies and procedures are that you already have. Like I mentioned in the Liberty case, they had it, they just weren't following what they had. And so is that, like Kim said, a result of us not training and people not knowing, or is it a result of we're just going to do whatever we want to do, even though we have that? So I think being mindful of what you have, and then making sure that you're providing as much access to resources to be able to
Mhm.
do that is going to
Well,
be.
and if you have individuals who are independently deciding what is and isn't hazing, that's a problem. Because I can have my own personal opinion on any law, whether or not I think the drinking age should be 18 or 21, how I feel about legalization of other substances, how I feel about the speed limit on a highway in Memphis, Tennessee. I can have lots of opinion, but at the end of the day, my opinion in the context of my role would be irrelevant because I should not be sitting in my office deciding that what the student is telling me isn't hazing so that I can avoid reporting it because I'm concerned that they're not going to come forward with and ask for help anymore. So you got to think about that because that can be a direct foreseeability, not with well intent. So how are you going to handle that? Because man, when Title IX popped up on us and the sexual violence, which was an important piece of legislation, mandatory reporters were like, students were taught to say things like, hypothetically, if I was assaulted, what is that? Hypothetically, I think that's a report of sexual violence. And so I think that how do you manage the differentiator between the individual group that's coming to help eradicate hazing and the report of an incident of hazing? And how are you going to do that dance? Because that can become problematic if the lacrosse team was found responsible by club sports for hazing. And the next year, a chapter expands on the campus and adopts the lacrosse team into their membership. But we never talked about the lacrosse team's hazing because Greek Life was the only office reporting it. I don't know. Like
Mhm.
and we don't have to, there's nothing that says you have to go backwards in your data. But I
Right.
think we just need to be conscientious about the totality of this, lest we expose ourselves. Again, not an attorney, but as a practitioner, that's where my brain would definitely go.
I think that's so helpful, Kim. Well, we are pretty much at time, and we want to encourage anyone if they have any questions. We'll stay on here a little bit longer to answer any questions you all might have. But I know every time I get engaged in a conversation about this, there's just more and more questions that need to be answered a lot of times. And there, at times, I've experienced folks who are misinterpreting the law that is coming out, and their campus is struggling to figure out, okay, well, what makes the most sense with our resources that we have available. You've got lots of support. This is going to be an ongoing learning process that we all are a part of with one another. As we see our campuses implement this by the deadlines, June 23rd, so less than 2 months from now, campuses need to have their policies and educational programs in place. And so I know that's kind of the most upcoming ticking clock that folks have questions about and that are working to meet that deadline. But here's additional, as you can see on the screen, other opportunities for you to engage in education, whether that just be resources or that actually be educational programs like the Interdisciplinary Institute for Hazing Prevention. Between the three of us, we've got you covered, and so we appreciate everyone being with us today. I'm looking at the chat. Kim, do we have any questions that have come up? Okay, it looks.
No, we don't have questions. I think the key things for me, Chris, would be don't just look at the checklist that's on the webpage.
Mhm.
Look in the nuance of all the other things. Don't just think Stop Campus Hazing Act, think Clary reportable crime. And what does all that bring to the table for us? I think we can establish an industry standard as a collective group of people to design primary prevention education, bring it to our communities, and really get a better grade. I asked an unnamed professional from the Department of Ed and the Clary Center recently at a conference what score he would give us for our prevention education on all other Clary crimes. And he said a C minus. Um, and then he said afterwards, we have to do better with the education that's going to roll out once this legislation around hazing passes. That was in October. As you all know, President Biden signed it in December. And so I think the more conversation we have amongst and with each other, the better that education is going to be. I just think that's so important. But don't get stuck in just the linear box because this is bringing a whole lot of important changes to systems and protocols that may not even exist yet on some campuses.
Fantastic. Okay. Rashid, anything else before we close?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We appreciate you.
Very much so. Here's our contact information. Please reach out if you need anything, and we'll be sure to let you know of our next educational webinar that we'll host sometime here, probably early summer. So thank you all again. Have a great rest of your week and look forward to seeing you at our next educational experience. Thanks.